The search for extraterrestrial intelligence represents humanity's quest to find signs of life beyond Earth.
In the case of SETI, it's perfect to study non-human intelligences on Earth. Why not practice?
If you're curious about SETI, or ever wondered what a whale might have in common with an alien, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Whales and Aliens, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence in the Salish Sea. I'm your host, Lisa Walker. Signs of water are one of the first things astronomers look for when searching for life in the galaxy. But water alone isn't enough to sustain a living system. In this episode, I'm honored to welcome Salish traditional knowledge keeper, Dr. Shandin Pete, who brings a perspective that connects water to creation stories, responsibility, and community. He speaks about the role of water in Indigenous knowledge, how these teachings shape our understanding of place, and what it means to come together as a society around the resources that sustain us.
I'm from Montana in the United States, in particular the western part, which doesn't let anybody know, like, well, what, so what, that country is beautiful, etc., or whatever. That's the general response. But I think more importantly, it's the location of, I guess you could say, the easternmost band of sort of the Salish language speaking group. So the Salish language cultural group or linguistic group covers a vast part of western Montana, northern Idaho, northern Washington, southern British Columbia. That's sort of the expanse of the Salish-speaking people. So us being on the sort of the eastern edge, we have a lot of influence because of contact with sort of the Plains Indigenous people. So a lot of our cultural ideology and even some stories start to sort of mix with those Plains attributes, or those Plains cultural expressions. Not exclusively, but that's sort of where we're situated. But I think more importantly, I grew up on an American reservation, so American Indian reservation, which in itself holds quite a strange dynamic because it's a mix of certain things in the past. But grew up on the southern end of the Flathead Indian Reservation, which is Flathead Indian Reservation in itself is somewhat unique, not in a very special way, but in the fact that the natives there are a minority on their own reservation, their own lands in which they were, if you quote unquote, were given by the U.S. government to live on. So it was open to homesteading, and 70% of it was sold off to non-Indigenous folks. So a lot of people on where I come from are mixed, with a degree of non-Indigenous folks in our past. Not everyone, but a lot of people do. So yeah, so that's where I'm from, and that's where I came from. And I because it's a very rural place. The town I grew up in is, fluctuates between 600 to 700 people. So it's very small, very rural. So yeah, just the opportunity to interact with the outdoors and in that sort of setting, like this sort of rural environment. It's just, I don't know, you interact with the environment and you get curious about a lot of things, why things are the way they are. Yeah, so that that formed me into a very curious person about the world, both the physical world, but and also sort of the spiritual world of my own people, because of sort of the history and the layers of oppression and assimilation. There was a lot of things, that unanswered questions about the cultural worldview, the cultural pursuits of my ancestors that a lot of people didn't know yet. So naturally, because of my curiosity in the environment and the physical earth matters, I tried to mix the two. I guess I didn't try. I didn't say I'm gonna study both these concurrently. It just happened, it just happened to be that way because of my inherent interests. So that's sort of how things formed. And there's a lot of other stuff along the way, but that's the abridged version of who I am and where I'm from. That term in itself, the water is quite abstract. It seems pretty concrete, as per the common human on the earth, because we think of water and we attribute it to the thing that we use in a certain way, whether we're ingesting it or using it to, cook or clean things. That's what we think about water. But if we think about water as a sort of a property, it's sort of liquidy or aqueous, I guess you could say, as an aqueous property. Well, that sort of as a vehicle can be comprised of many things, and those many things are not always good for us. That it can be comprised of. You could think of like ocean water. I think of water. Yeah, the ocean falls into that. The ocean is made of water, but we can't drink it. We'll certainly die if we drink enough of it. It's just far too salty for us. So yeah, I mean, you're right. As far as the general term and in how we use it in day-to-day conversation generally implies that it is of a value to us in terms of how we might use it. Some people don't like the word, but it's descriptive as a resource. Water is as a resource. Some people feel that the word resource distances us on a personal level from that thing. But essentially, in the English language, that water is a resource for us in in a very critical way. If we don't have it, we all die, and that's true with all living things. Sewilk, sewilk. So yeah, water is strange. Is this a strange thing? And if you're a sort of a student of some of the indigenous languages, even not even just indigenous, but like languages worldwide, if one's really interested in like the root words, the etymology of things, water is across the globe, across cultures, is revered as something pretty important and pretty special. It's sort of this life-giving entity. And I have a brother who's he really obsesses over the language, and he's like it's like trying to unlock like the root words, to a level of I mean, from his conversations with me, like from the beginning of time, like the beginning of the language when it was first uttered. He's comes up with these descriptions. But generally that word, from my understanding, it contains two different roots. Sell and then the end. And sell is very similar to um, an action of asking. So when you want something from somebody in the language, you say sewent. Sewent, then you state the thing that you want. So sewent, and you could say, anything after that. So you're asking for something. And then the end of that word of sewet, like that indicates sort of the liquidy property, like how it is physically, this thing we see as and know as liquid. So some folks have interpreted that as in a way that when you utter that word, you're always acknowledging it, that you're going to use it in a way. So every time you say it, you're going to use it, and it makes sense because that word is used exclusively for times when we use water for our own consumption, our own use. There's other words that we say for a river or a lake or a springs or a stream or the ocean. But that word especially is used when it relates to us as humans using that water for the purposes of our bodies, or the things that we use for our body, from my understanding. For myself, I'm not a fluent speaker of the language. I'm just like at a level where I can operate within a very specific context. I can understand and probably speak very incorrectly at times of things. But I've been a student of the language on and off for a long, long time. And so I do recognize when I hear a word that's familiar here on the coast, like the coastal Salish, the Hunkaminam language, and how that intersects with the interior. The interior is more evident. So if you look at the British Columbia over in the Okanagan, the language is very, very identical to our dialect in Montana. But as you come closer to the coast, things start to change. And from my understanding, and from the folks that I know that are fluent and that have interacted with the folks here, it seems as if there's I shouldn't say simple, but from their words, there's a shift in the consonant that changes the word, or that makes the word sound different, but it's really actually the same structure and of the same grammar. It's just it's pronounced differently. But I know for a fact that there are words that are spoken here that aren't spoken in the interior. And of course, that's related to the difference in flora and fauna, I guess, if you will. Um, so like the sea life, creatures of the sea, are not in existence in the interior. But there's remnants of that in the interior. I would just, I was just reading a story about that we have in the interior about a whale. And that's really bizarre and out of place for this deep interior location. So either that story, migrated from the coast, or it's a remnant from a time when we were more interacting with, or more living more close to the coast. I don't know. It's really hard to say, and to generate a really concrete hypothesis about what that does and what happens. But there's one word that I found that is, well, I mean, there's probably more. I just don't engage a lot in the language like someone like my brother does. But there's one word that I hear across almost all these Salish speaking groups that's the same. It's this one berry that we use for it's kind of like a dessert berry, I guess. And when you get it and you whip it, it whips up into a foam, a real bitter foam, and it's quite the treat to eat. And but it's pronounced very similar across from the interior over into the coast. And so in the interior we say schosum. And then if you go a bit to the north, you hear it start to change into like shusum, and different variants of schusum, or it just changes very slightly, but it's generally the same in that particular way. And then my oldest son, who goes to school with some of the Musqueams here in Vancouver, so he's sort of an emerging student of the language. So he'll compare words, and he'll find common words that they say and that we say that they mean the same thing, but they're used differently. Like the word for to sit down, like to sit down is, we use a particular word, but it's used in a sort of different way, but it's the same, it's the same word. Yeah. Stories are, as I mentioned previously, they're great encoders of history, of landscape processes. They're encoders of sort of factual knowledge as well. So how something became to be, but they can be, they're great at delivering a large amount of information in a short time, and they're great for the human mind to to grasp and remember. It's easier to remember a great story than a list of facts. I mean, I think everyone can attest to that. So the role of story is sort of, it seems to fill that need, like the human need to be entertained. That's just something that we enjoy. And then the need to pass along very important information. And everyone is a storyteller in their own right. I think some have different modes that are better for some situations than others. I think, like I know in certain instances I'll go on and on about something, and about 60% of the people will enjoy it, but 40% of the people are like, get to the point, dude. And us as humans, we have varying needs of how we want delivered information. Sometimes we want to get to the point. We don't want to mess around. We're just going to get to the point. And other times, we want to sort of wander around and sort of enjoy the inner workings of someone's mind and how they would go about coloring a story for you. And I don't think it's, at least from my perspective, it's not something like a storyteller, anyone in this, for this matter. I don't think we do things intentionally, like we're going to say, okay, I'm really going to embellish this story. Like it's just automatic. It's just something that's innate in us that we do at times. For what reason, we don't know. Sometimes it's subconscious because we subconsciously want to make a big point, or we want to build drama. But it feels less when I think of it as like a prescription. Like, okay, I'm gonna go into this. I'm gonna build suspense and intrigue. I'm gonna create some cliffhangers. I'm gonna Tarantino this story. So I'm gonna start at the beginning, go to the end. It seems very performative, in that particular way. And sometimes I don't know. I guess I do that. Like in a lecture, I'll do that. I'll think, okay, I want to make sure I have these mental breaks in this lecture so that students aren't getting bored with just fact-based content, but sort of engaging them in an activity that allows them to get out of that space. But generally, like Indigenous people and people across the world, I hate to just say Indigenous people, but natural storytellers, they don't plan their stories out. They're gifted with a way to tell it in a way that's engaging and captivating. And like I said, everyone's a storyteller. It doesn't matter who you are, how often you tell stories. Everyone sort of has a gift to tell a story in a particular way that's non-performative, it's natural, and people can tell when it is. I remember watching a YouTube video once of like this event, the Indigenous storyteller event. It's like, I'm gonna check this out, see what they got going on. And some of them, you could tell they were just going way over the top, man. It felt unnatural. It felt really unnatural. But some of them, you could tell it just flowed out of their brain. It just flowed out, and you could tell they've told this story a lot of times, and it's probably not the same every time, because they have the different moods. They see different audience members. The environment in which they're telling it sort of gives you a different feeling and a manner about you. So I think storytelling is very situational, non-performative, and very natural. And that makes sense. If you had a prescribed story and you told it over and over again, it might be boring if you told it to some young people versus some old people versus some middle-aged people. It might not capture or hit the same way, but it makes me wonder about, like, Shakespeare and his plays, and they don't vary much. I don't think they're told the same way all the time, every time, but maybe I'm just not a student of it. But people, it's engaging in some way, so that I think there's probably some archetypes out there that are just good stories all the time. The stories of creation from my people are illustrative of sort of potential human demeanor. So they sort of show you how we can be, and sometimes generally it's like the bad parts. We can be deceptive, we can be murderous, we can be jealous. So it's really highlighting these sort of human qualities that are undesirable. And I think, and I don't know, I can't say for sure, but sort of as a reminder to keep us centered on how we ought to behave in the world, because it's demonstrated through these stories how things can go wrong if we behave in these particular ways. But a lot of that, so the stories that also demonstrate that a lot of that cannot be kept in check without the help or without the validation or control of others. So it often has this dialogue of this relationship between things or many people or many things. Um, so our ability to connect with people and to believe in the same thing, that's been fragmented quite a bit. And I think if you look at a lot of the indigenous groups in North America and the history of U.S. federal policy, Canadian federal policy, they were all they're trying to achieve the same thing, to assimilate indigenous people to either the Canadian or the U.S. way of living. And that was um, pretty harmful in that it sort of broke up this cohesive social unit. But there was a more to it that broke that up. It was, and I think one of the real important ones, um, well, so the breaking up of that social unit, you lost tradition, a really important tradition that affirmed the value and a morality of the world and toward each other. So when that we sort of drifted apart, we lacked internal social control to check people when they're gossiping too much, when they're lying too much, or being too greedy. We sort of drifted away from that. And sort of one of the things that seemed to attribute or facilitate that drift was also a change in the economy. We didn't rely on each other as much anymore. So to be successful in a mode of living that was sort of the land, it required certain roles and certain skills to propagate, and the propagation of those skills depended on not just an individual but a group of people all working to achieve that same goal. So an example would be hunting. It requires more than one person if you're hunting with just a bow and arrow. So it requires a coordinated effort, not only just the technique of hunting, but to know where to go, what time to go. Those kind of things have to be all assimilated into that activity. And then not only that activity, but what happens before, the preparation and maintenance of tools and weapons, those kind of things. But what happens after the carrying of the meat so it doesn't spoil, and of the hide and everything, so that all that effort can be realized in a product that helps people to survive, clothing and food, those kind of things. So it requires a lot of people, men, women, children, all to do that one activity. But nowadays with the economy we have, because we don't rely on each other in that particular way, we have like American and Canadians wanted us to be self-sufficient. So we got an education and got some skills to get a job, and we don't really need our neighbor anymore. We don't need them to help us with those particular things anymore. So that really caused this wider drift. And then the things that sort of fall through the net when you pull it, when you stretch it, is, the holes get bigger and the traditions start falling through. And So you're not affirming with your neighbor the value of being honest with them, the value of sharing, the value of, not gossiping. And so really you become more and more insular with your pursuits, life pursuits. And yeah, it's not just, it's everyone's afflicted with this sort of phenomenon that can happen. If we drift apart socially, then we start losing things that affirm how we ought to treat each other. And so that that spells a sort of not a great I mean it doesn't answer your question about what do we do. It says here's the problem. Here's like one of the problems. The reason why we can allow someone to get away with lying so much is because we don't have the social control to let it to remedy it anymore. That then you see that propagated in society today, not only in indigenous societies but all across the world. So really, the answer is I don't have an answer. I don't know. I mean, I can see what can be done, but the machine of capitalism is such a strong one because our own human needs fuel it. We're we're a creature of convenience. We're gonna do things the easy way. That's just how we are. We're practical beings. And if an iPhone is gonna make our life easier and entertaining, that's hard to rip that out of our hands. It's like an alcoholic. It's like to quit drinking is difficult for people who are addicted in that way. And so we're sort of addicted to convenience. We're addicted to making our lives easier, last longer, because we want to enjoy the parts of life that are easy. And to do hard work that's hard. It's hard. Sacrifice is hard. So I mean if you can find an answer in that, I'm not saying get rid of your cell phone. I'm saying really balance your life with sacrifice that involves a social network of people. Engage in a manner of like giving of yourself to something, if that makes sense. I mean, I will tell my kids this when they're growing up and even today, if you're not sacrificing, or if you don't feel like a sacrifice, then you're probably not doing it right. You know, if it feels too easy and you're not giving up something, you're probably not doing it right. So it should come with some not adversity or negativity, but you should be tired. You should feel like I've done something to help someone else or to help myself to be better in a certain way. Not in a selfish way, but sort of building a connection through suffering in a way. I don't know if that makes sense, but but that's hard, man. That's hard. I mean, we're so addicted to convenience. It's really bad and it's hard to give up. I won't give it up, man. Raise your hand if you want to go back to the buffalo hunting days. Nobody does. It's hard work, man. It's hard work. Ideally, yeah, that'd be awesome, but you know, 99% of us can't ride a horse without a saddle and ride up next to a buffalo and shoot it with the bow and arrow that we made out of our own hands. Among other things. Among other things. Tradition can start in one generation. Yeah, we all have that power to really change how we want to be in the world through our children. That's always a good one that I think of as well. Is treat your children right, teach them to live well, be good to each other. That's so important. So important. And stories help do that.